Hello, thank you for the invite to join you today. My name is Claire Banham and I'm part of the team at the local youth work charity, the 267 Project. But actually it's because of my work in the area of mental health that Mark asked me to preach in this series about the storms of life. Well, let's face it, we have all been rocked by the storm of these last few months. But the ministry I founded a few years back, called The Haven, is particularly concerned about the effect that lockdown and our new COVID-shaped society has had on the teenagers we support, those who were already struggling with mental health disorders such as problematic anxiety. Over the last few years, there has been a growing awareness of the scale of the mental health issue in this country. And some might argue that poor mental health is in itself like a tsunami of unmet needs that is increasingly affecting more and more of us. But if we take a broader view today, I think we can recognise that all of us are susceptible to ups and downs in our mental health. Just as the healthiest athletes amongst us can catch a nasty cold, even those of us with the sunniest of dispositions can occasionally feel mentally drained and down. And as Christians, we have to be honest that our faith is not a vaccine for these sorts of mental struggles. As we will see from the passage in 1 Kings that we're looking at today, even the true giants of faith can be brought to the pit of despair in their walk through life. You see, storms of life are inevitable. Stress and anxiety are a normal part of life. So how can we make sure that the boat of our mental health will help us to ride the waves and not get sucked under? Well, I chose this story of Elijah because I think it succinctly illustrates a message that we're keen to highlight at the Haven. We say it is helpful to notice what's going on the inside so we can take more control of what's happening on the outside. So often it is our external actions and behaviour that give us the necessary clue that something is very wrong on the inside, that something is amiss with our emotional and mental well-being. In this passage, we quickly notice that something is very wrong. We're told Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. Elijah is in the midst of a breakdown. He is being swept along in the strength of his inner turmoil, and his outward actions appear to be beyond his control. And then to compound the problems, just when he desperately needs support from friends and allies, he isolates himself. We're told he leaves his servant behind. I think these are the actions of a desperate person who's reacting to the crisis rather than taking control of the situation. We can see that he has literally reached the end of his own resources. He's lost the will to go on, and he even prays that he might die. Now, if that speaks to your situation, if the thought of killing yourself sometimes becomes real and possible, please reach out to someone, anyone. Because those thoughts that can feel so strong in the dark of your own mind can lose much of their control when you bring them into the light and share them with someone else. Thankfully, there is a much greater understanding of suicidal thoughts today, and you don't need to face this battle alone. If you don't feel able to share your situation with friends, family, or your church family, then the charity The Samaritans provide trained listeners 24/7. Alternatively, if you suspect that someone you know is going through this type of inner battle, never be afraid to ask how they're really doing. Even check if they are having suicidal thoughts. You see, we can't harm people by checking in on them and letting them know we care enough to ask. If you need more help with this, I recommend the Ollie Foundation, a local charity who provide excellent support and resources for suicide prevention. So back to Elijah's struggles. And I'd like to use the acronym HALT to help us see what is going on with Elijah, and in turn how we can notice what is going on in our inner life and why. By noticing what's happening on the inside, we can better control what's happening on the outside, the more visible parts of our life, and in turn we'll be in better shape for weathering life's storms. So HALT, and H is for hungry or hydration. When Elijah hits rock bottom, one of the first things that God's angel does is feed the poor broken down prophet. Now, parents will probably recognise the term hangry, and certainly there were a number of years when if my son was having a meltdown about life, the most effective response was to feed him as quickly as possible. The chocolate bar Snickers ran a successful campaign a few years ago under the strapline, "You're not you when you're hungry." And actually that probably counts for double when we're dehydrated. So when we feel a kind of inner turmoil or confusion, the best immediate response is to check if we just need to eat or drink something. Isn't it reassuring that, as we see in this story, Jehovah Jireh, our God who provides, so often starts with the most practical of help. Next, A is for angry. Now, Elijah might not seem at first glance to be in a temper, but look at what he says when he reaches the end of his tether. He says, "Take my life, I am no better than my ancestors." Well, who has said that he should be better than his ancestors? Where is that comparison coming from? Who is it that's pointing the finger? I think it kind of appears to me that actually it's Elijah. Elijah is angry or disappointed with himself, which can be the most destructive form of anger. Is anger at the heart of our distress? Anger at somebody or something else, or perhaps anger at ourselves? Of course, anger is very often a self-protective mechanism that sort of erupts when we are frightened of potential pain. So if we are angry, it is worth asking why. What is pushing your button? And what is causing you to kind of lash out? I have come to realise that although I have a really close and loving relationship with my mother, she doesn't really do sad. So over the years I've struggled to help other loved ones, especially my children, when they were sad. And that sense of helplessness and confusion would often present itself as anger. I would be angry that I didn't know how to deal with my sobbing child. But that could easily come across that I was actually angry with my child, which was just heartbreaking. Now I'm able to feel that turmoil but recognise what's happening, so I don't need to default to anger anymore. Noticing anger and asking ourselves, what is that anger really about, is genuinely helpful for our mental health. L stands for loneliness, which we've already noticed in Elijah's plight. So, do you need the company of others to top up your mental and emotional tank, or do you need alone time to feel recharged? Recently, I was watching a documentary on the making of the children's movie Frozen 2. Now, my family will tell you that I well up at the hint of anything emotional on TV. I've been known to cry at adverts. But even I realised that something was wrong when I just couldn't stop crying. So I kind of asked myself what was prompting this strong emotion. And eventually I realised that the programme was depicting this sort of team of people working in close physical proximity to one another, showing them hugging and being tactilely sort of demonstrative with their encouragements for one another. Post-COVID, I was mourning the way I used to work with colleagues and friends. Like many of you, I've been working from home since March, and I am missing physical contact with people. So recently I've taken steps to intentionally book in safe, socially distanced meetups rather than simply relying on Zoom or phone calls for work. So, are you lonely? Or perhaps you're a natural introvert and you need time by yourself to feel mentally more able to weather the storms. It's worth checking in. So lastly, T is for tired, which we can see in Elijah's overwhelming need for sleep. When we are tired, life's problems feel so much bigger and harder to overcome. And yet there is a prevailing lie in our culture that somehow sleep is for wimps and that successful people just power on through. John Mark Comer, the American pastor and author of the influential book The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, says this: "Love, joy and peace are at the heart of all Jesus is trying to grow in the soil of your life. And all three are incompatible with hurry." Well, I agree, but I might also say this: love, joy and peace are at the heart of all Jesus is trying to grow in the soil of your life, and all three are incomprehensibly harder when you are flipping knackered. Do you need rest? Do you need to proactively manage your sleep? Do you just need a break? So halt. Hungry, angry, lonely and tired. We can use these 4 categories as a sort of emergency MOT for our inner life. If the warning light has come on, if our actions and behaviour feel out of control, or we just don't feel like ourselves, we can use halt to do a valuable self-check. Because when we get good at noticing what is really going on in our inner life, we can in turn get better at spotting the ways that God is providing the help we need, just as he provided for Elijah. And then we can lean into God and we can lean on one another. But before we finish, perhaps it is worth noting that Elijah's breakdown seemingly comes at the time of his biggest victory. Just before this passage, Elijah had won a monumental game of dare with an entire entourage of 850 pagan priests. He'd brought the people of Israel back to a place of believing that Yahweh was their only Lord and God. Elijah was at the top of his game. He should have been at the top of the world. But then, at the start of our passage, a threat comes in from the queen, Jezebel. Actually, it's a threat that he has faced from day one of being chosen as God's prophet. But this time, with this threat, Elijah just crumbles. I wonder if this strikes a chord with any of us today. That at the times when we should feel buoyed up and winning at life, sometimes it is in our supposed successes that our mental health can feel its weakest. Even if the rest of the world views you as a winner, sometimes our inner voice accuses us of being an imposter or a failure. This is a desperate, desperate feeling, isn't it? When the gap between our outside persona and our inner self is like a kind of gaping, vast chasm. It's then, particularly then, you need to know that God knows you inside and out and utterly loves the real you. Because, of course, you can only be the real you with God. So to conclude, storms of life are inevitable. As Christians, we rightly prioritise loving our neighbour, but perhaps in order to weather the storms and so be able to carry on caring for others, we need to take our cue from God and learn to love ourselves inside and out. Amen.